Now that our son is gone, you'll be returning to your family home, right? This house will be empty and lonely, so we'll live here instead. Don't worry, everything will be fine. My beloved husband suddenly passed away. The ones who came to me drowned in sorrow after the funeral were my husband's parents. This house is filled with memories, albeit a few of the times I spent with my husband. Yet why must I leave this house without a moment to wipe my tears? My mother-in-law coldly told me this. My name is Lily. I work as a clerk at a real estate company. I met my beloved husband Jacob at the real estate company where I work. Jacob was the brother of my colleague. They had a good relationship, and it seemed their workplaces were close to each other. That's why Jacob often visited his brother's workplace. As a clerk, I was not a stranger to my colleague, who would later become my brother-in-law. Through this connection, he introduced me to his brother, and gradually, we started spending more time together, being invited to lunch by the brothers and so on. Jacob was cheerful and a good person, and we got along well. However, at that time, I didn't see him as a romantic interest, and I thought he felt the same. But then, an event happened that changed our relationship. We were supposed to meet at a restaurant reserved by my colleague, but he couldn't make it due to sudden matters. It was disappointing, but we thought it was a waste to cancel the reservation. So Jacob and I ended up spending time alone for the first time. I later found out that my brother-in-law had planned this, wanting to leave Jacob and me alone together over delicious food. Our conversation grew lively, and we quickly delved deep into each other's lives and thoughts, realizing how close we were becoming every time I experienced his personality. I was charmed by his kind smile, and this day marked the start of a change in our relationship. It didn't take long for us to get married, all thanks to my colleague, who was also my brother-in-law. For the events that followed, I would be deeply grateful to him. Today was the first time I was meeting my in-laws since getting married. I was full of anxiety, but my father-in-law and mother-in-law warmly welcomed me. Their friendly interactions gradually helped me relax. Thank you for coming. We're so happy. We were looking forward to meeting you, Lily, my mother-in-law said, showing great care. My in-laws, like my husband, seemed to have independent personalities and were approachable people. I was relieved and grateful for the comfortable time spent with my in-laws. We met my in-laws several times, and they never imposed their views on marriage or child rearing, maintaining an appropriate distance. Both wished for our happiness. The topic of living in the same town or more closely with my in-laws came up, but my husband and I had plans to build our own house. There's a piece of land my grandfather left me, I explained. My in-laws listened to my story intently and nodded in understanding. My grandfather was very fond of me, his only grandchild, and even left me the family house and land. The house was splendidly renovated down to the interior details after completing the inheritance procedures. It seemed as if he had been waiting for that moment to pass away. The area around the property had just undergone redevelopment, and its value was skyrocketing due to its prime location. As someone involved in real estate, I knew that such a property was better off sold boldly than lived in. My husband and I had moved into that house after getting married. But considering the distance to our workplaces, it seemed difficult to continue living there, regardless of its excellent location. I'm deeply grateful for my grandfather's love, but selling the inherited property seemed more beneficial for our dream home plan. We were told that we were free to either live in or sell the inherited house. So my husband and I were considering selling both the land and the house. During the planning of the sale, a significant change occurred in our daily lives. My husband, who worked in sales, was transferred to a different branch of his company, a large corporation with many branches nationwide. He was deemed the only suitable candidate for the job, leaving us with no option to refuse. Due to my work circumstances, we decided that he would go on a solo assignment, promising to come back during the holidays. He said, "Besides, my parents said they'd come to visit occasionally. You don't have to push yourself. But maybe you can go out with them sometimes. I don't mind going out." His parents seemed nice, and the plan was to sell the house, but it looked like the sale would be delayed. So my husband's solo assignment began. I was filled with loneliness and anxiety at the sudden change, but I had to suppress those feelings and look forward to living together again, as my husband said. My in-laws, especially my mother-in-law, frequently visited on weekends. It seemed that my father-in-law used to be away on business trips in the past. My mother-in-law shared her experiences of enduring loneliness while caring for her young sons. Even without children, you can create family memories. Let's go out together. Shopping might be a nice change of pace. Let's go, Lily. My mother-in-law encouraged me in this way. Thanks to her, I never felt lonely, and my weekends became rather busy. However, I started to notice something gradually. Every time I had a weekend off, my mother-in-law almost always suggested going out. The outings themselves weren't the issue. About a month in, her invitations began to feel a bit forceful. She started to ignore whether I was tired or had household chores when I said I wanted to rest that week. She looked as if I was being unreasonable, but I insisted. It's fun to go out together, right? You don't dislike being with me, do you? I replied, it's not that. It's just that we go out every week, and I think you should rest too. She looked sad at my response, and when I reluctantly agreed, she smiled brightly and acted as if she had forgotten how persistently she had been following me around. My doubts about her behavior grew. The places she insisted on taking me to always involved expensive shopping with high-end brands and costly meals. She often left the store first, making it seem like I was supposed to pay. She never thanked me for the payments, nor did she ever offer to pay her part. Indeed, my husband and I own our home and have a sufficient salary, so we don't have to worry about savings. However, having both been committed to saving, I couldn't help but feel uncomfortable with my mother-in-law's extravagance. The situation was the same even when my father-in-law was around. My burden only increased with his presence. Though I realized I couldn't stay silent about this, discussing the issue with my husband was difficult. He had said he would come home during the holidays, but his work at his posting seemed extremely busy, and he hardly had a chance to return. You've been going out with Mom every week, haven't you? Are you okay? Is there anything you're worried about? When talking to my husband over a video call, I noticed the dark circles under his eyes and his slightly haggard appearance. I understood it was due to the fatigue of work, even without asking. Discussing the issue with my in-laws would only add to his stress, so I forced a carefree attitude. Your mother has been good to me. You take care of yourself, Jacob. I'm fine, so don't worry. Nevertheless, I continued to pay for expenses related to my in-laws without being able to refuse them. Their behavior gradually escalated, and one day, when I said I couldn't go out, they finally said, "Then could we borrow a little money?" "Yes, just a little bit. We've already made a restaurant reservation. We'll take another friend instead of you. So, could you lend us just the shortfall?" I didn't want to lend them money, but refusing would have made the situation more complicated and unmanageable. Reluctantly, I accepted my mother-in-law's request and took out the money from my wallet. Even then, I never talked about this situation with my husband. When I hinted that I might discuss it with Jacob, she said it would be embarrassing to talk to him about it. I was shocked to think that she tried to take advantage of her son's wife instead of her eldest son. I stopped expecting anything from my mother-in-law. The demands for money from her became a routine, given under the guise of pocket money, because I knew that would stop her from pressuring me. I was aware the problem was escalating, but talking about it with my mother-in-law was difficult, and I was also exhausted. Her behavior became increasingly incomprehensible and bizarre. She would suddenly visit our house without notice and closely inspect the interior. I felt as though my privacy was being invaded. "Is this piece of furniture a relic from Lily's grandfather? It's lovely. Amazingly, you have such high-quality items here," she remarked, gazing at some of the furniture in our house that was cherished by my grandfather. My mother-in-law seemed fascinated by them, visiting often to gaze at them intently, enjoying them as if they were her own. "This is mine and my husband's home. I finally started to consider discussing my mother-in-law's behavior with him. He might be surprised if I brought up the issue, but it would be a great relief if we could think of a way to deal with her together. Her actions were simply intolerable. Even though she's my mother-in-law, invading privacy is an unacceptable act. At the same time, I decided to talk to my husband. It was also decided that his assignment away from home would end. I just had to endure a little longer until his return. This would hopefully put an end to my in-laws' demands for money. A faint hope was sprouting within me since my husband was working so hard every day. I felt I should also persevere a bit longer. I was looking forward to reuniting with him. But then an unexpected situation occurred. Jacob collapsed and was in the hospital. My mind went blank. The call came from his workplace at the assignment location, and I hurried to the hospital he was taken to. It was a sudden heart attack, perhaps due to overwork. Though Jacob was rushed by ambulance, it was too late. The man who had been in the picture of health had suddenly passed away from a heart attack. I couldn't accept the reality and was in a daze throughout the funeral. To be honest, I hardly remember anything from that time due to the overwhelming sense of loss. My brother-in-law came to help, taking on many duties that I would normally have done. "You just lost your brother too. I'm sorry for making you help so much. It's my brother's funeral. Of course, I should help. By the way, how are things with the land? Is the house ready?" After the funeral, my brother-in-law and I talked while cleaning up. I agreed to a certain proposal he made, assuring him it was okay. A few days after my husband's funeral, my in-laws came to our house, but it was immediately clear they weren't here to console me. Unfortunately, our son passed away suddenly, but don't worry, we're here for you, my mother-in-law said, her face wearing an unnatural smile. Incredibly, she had brought a truck filled to the brim with furniture and belongings from the family home. I was speechless with surprise and confusion. It was preparations for a move. Without any discussion, my in-laws seemed to be planning to move into our house. Their motive was clear. "You're after this land, aren't you?" I voiced the suspicion swirling in my mind. With a chilly smile, my mother-in-law said, "The value of this land has increased significantly. I've always had my eye on this house. It's thanks to this place that you could marry my son. I allowed the marriage because you inherited this land." My heart filled with despair. Stunned, I asked, "Are you saying you and father-in-law will live with me?" "Of course not. Don't be ridiculous." She snapped back sharply at my confused question. Regardless of Jacob's death, she had always intended to take this house from me. My in-laws were plotting to kick me out and take over the land for themselves. They assumed I would leave the house now that my husband was gone. Now that her son is gone, you'll go back to your hometown, right? It'll be sad to leave the house empty, so we'll live here instead. So don't worry, my mother-in-law said, her lips curling into a smile. I felt terror as I corrected her misunderstanding. This house has already been sold. It was hard not to laugh at her misunderstanding, and my face contorted. My mother-in-law showed a look of astonishment and then stood dumbfounded. At that moment, a crew from another moving company arrived. "Excuse me, we're here to help you move," they said, approaching for confirmation upon seeing another moving company's truck parked in front of the house. Another crew arranged by my mother-in-law also got out of their vehicle. While the work never seemed to start, the entrance of other movers into the house seemed to alert them that something odd was happening. I asked my in-laws to explain the situation, but they were both too flustered to articulate their thoughts. Watching them, I began to calm down. Arguing in this situation wouldn't solve anything. I first asked the movers arranged by my in-laws to move their truck, then bluntly told my in-laws, "This house has already been sold to someone else. They're already scheduled to move in. We can't let you bring your belongings into someone else's home." To the surprise of my in-laws and the movers, a luxury car arrived, and a wealthy-looking family got out. They were the new owners. This house and land were no longer mine. My in-laws were even more confused and couldn't grasp the situation. "Anyway, can you please move your truck quickly?" We need to move our stuff." When the truck of my in-laws moved, the new residence movers quickly began moving in the furniture. My in-laws, unable to accept the situation, began to aggressively confront me. The new male homeowner, ensuring his family's safety, left them in the car and hurried over to us. Another commotion ensued. "What's going on here? We bought this house. Why is there another moving truck? Please leave immediately." I had no choice but to apologize profusely, as I hadn't expected my in-laws' visit. However, my in-laws refused to leave. Instead, they forcefully entered the house. The interior of the house had changed significantly from what my in-laws remembered. None of the furniture we used was left. Seeing this, my mother-in-law panicked and began to cause a scene. "What is this? The house is empty. There are no antiques, no lights. Those were my favorites. What's going on?" She was unable to comprehend the situation, and even when the new male homeowner threatened to call the police, she just stood there stunned. My father-in-law seemed to snap out of it at the sound of the man's voice and quickly went over to my mother-in-law, dragging her out of the house. The excited mother-in-law seemed to calm down a bit when she was a little away from the house. I first apologized to the male homeowner. "There might be more trouble in the future," he said, and at his request, I relayed my in-laws' names and addresses to him to settle the matter. I was already exhausted at this point, but I still needed to explain things to my in-laws. I went back to them and explained the situation calmly. A few days before my husband passed away, we had already finished moving. We had always planned to sell this house along with the land. The sale of the house eventually went according to plan, despite a temporary halt to my husband's solo work assignment. My brother-in-law played a significant role in this. I was bewildered by the demands for money from my in-laws and couldn't discuss it with anyone because I didn't want to worry my husband, leaving me feeling deeply depressed. It was my brother-in-law who cared for me during this time. He's always had a strained relationship with my in-laws and had told me he'd be there to help if I ever needed it. Not wanting to burden my husband or strain my relations with my in-laws further, I confided everything to my brother-in-law, who promised to keep it a secret. On hearing my story, he was furious with my in-laws. As an employee of a real estate company and my husband's brother, he was well aware of my in-laws' plans. He considered my husband Jacob his only family, but he also saw me as a family member. He speculated that my in-laws would either try to live in our house eventually or kick us out to take it over themselves. According to him, my in-laws are naive, pretentious, boastful, and unscrupulous, especially my mother-in-law, who, despite appearing gracious in public, is self-centered, cunning, and malicious. Perhaps because of his blood relation, my brother-in-law's insights into my in-laws were quite shocking. My husband, the eldest son, was unaware of their true nature, probably because they always presented a good front. My brother-in-law suggested we sell the land before we could be ousted by my in-laws. I agreed to this and proceeded with the arrangements. Though the house and land were an important inheritance from my grandfather, I didn't want to keep them if they would cause problems for us as a couple. I didn't want to involve such a cherished property in any unpleasant disputes. Of course, I had thoroughly discussed and agreed upon this with my husband. When he learned of all my in-laws had done, he was forgiving. "I'm sorry, I didn't realize this earlier. If you think it's best, Lily, let's sell it before my parents can interfere. I'm truly sorry to have to let go of Grandpa's house. Don't worry, I think Grandpa would have preferred us to let it go rather than have it cause problems." My decision was made to protect our future together, not because of issues with my in-laws. With that settled, the first step was to find a new home and move without letting my in-laws catch on to our plans. Thanks to my brother-in-law, a real estate expert, we quickly found a suitable buyer for the house. It was nearly new, and we set a modest price considering the slight wear from our living there. A buyer appeared swiftly, and the contract was signed in no time. That buyer was the family that had just arrived. Originally, I was supposed to wait for Jacob's return to our new home. But now he's gone, and that's my only regret. As the movers swiftly brought in the furniture, my ousted in-laws could only stare in disbelief. But the situation with my in-laws couldn't just be ignored. The movers they had hired, filled with anger, demanded an explanation for the situation. For the movers, it was understandable as they faced an incomprehensible reason for the book in confusion. Unbelievable. This is a breach of contract. They confronted my in-laws, but they were too distraught to give a coherent explanation. After some trouble, the movers decided to leave for the day but mentioned that additional fees would be incurred due to the unexpected circumstances. Finally realizing the truth of the matter, my mother-in-law, with trembling hands, grabbed my clothes. "This is the house of my eldest son's wife, the place where we should live, right?" she said, trying to justify herself in her confusion. But I simply ignored her words and left with my belongings. This land now belonged to a new family, and I had no rights to it. The memorial service for my husband went smoothly. I saw my in-laws there, but although they seemed like they wanted to talk about the house, they left without saying anything. I had no obligations towards them anymore, and our interactions dwindled after that. My days became peaceful. I was supposed to start a new life with my husband in our new home, but I was left to face the sorrow of his loss. Though I had savings from the house sale, Jacob was no longer with me, and our plans to build a house vanished. I slowly tried to move forward, cherishing the memories of my husband while returning to work. Meanwhile, my in-laws, especially my mother-in-law, seemed increasingly dissatisfied. I didn't inform them of my new address, not wanting any further contact, which frustrated them greatly. They couldn't visit their distant second son and didn't know my current address. My mother-in-law seemed to be accumulating stress with nowhere to go. Finally, she snapped one night. She scattered gasoline around our old house. Luckily, a passerby noticed her suspicious behavior, and she was quickly restrained before anything serious happened. The police were alerted, and she was arrested for attempted arson when they found her with a lighter. The owner of the house, nearly a victim of arson, was furious upon realizing she was the woman who had previously intruded into the house. When I received a call about a lawsuit from the owner against my mother-in-law, I apologized profusely, but it was an apology for the fear that his family had to endure because of this incident. There was nothing I could do about my mother-in-law's actions. In the end, unable to let go of her obsession with the house, my mother-in-law faced charges and was arrested. I apologized repeatedly to the owner, finally gaining some understanding and vowing that such an incident would never happen again. My mother-in-law, raised in a wealthy environment where she could have anything, probably felt immense frustration and jealousy when she couldn't get the house. Her obsession grew stronger and eventually led her to commit a crime, landing her in prison. Ideally, my father-in-law should have been her support, but their relationship deteriorated after her arrest, leading to a forced divorce from his side. As a result, even when she is released, my mother-in-law will have no home to return to. But this is the result of her own choices. Even though my brother-in-law feels the loneliness of losing his brother, he comforted me by saying, "I can keep going because I have a sister-in-law." Although my relationship with my in-laws has ended, it doesn't mean that I have completely lost my family. With the belief that my husband in heaven is watching over me, I've decided to live my days in peace. I hope you guys enjoy our video. To watch more interesting stories, subscribe to our channel. Thank you.